Jezebel entered history as one of the most controversial women in the Bible, but her story began far from the land of Israel. She was born into the royal family of Sidon, a wealthy Phoenician kingdom located along the Mediterranean coast. Her father, King Ahab, was not only a ruler but also a priest of Baal, one of the most important gods worshipped by the Phoenicians. From an early age, Jezebel was surrounded by magnificent temples, elaborate ceremonies, and powerful religious traditions dedicated to Baal and other pagan deities. She grew up believing that these gods brought prosperity, victory, and protection to her people. As a princess, Jezebel received an education that prepared her for power. She learned how kingdoms were governed, how alliances were formed, and how influence could be used to control nations. Intelligent and ambitious, she developed a strong personality and a determination to achieve her goals. Unlike many royal women of her time, Jezebel was not content to remain in the background. She possessed a commanding presence that would later shape the destiny of an entire kingdom. Meanwhile, in the northern kingdom of Israel, King Ahab sought to strengthen political ties with neighboring nations. To secure an alliance with Phoenicia, he married Jezebel. The union promised economic benefits and military cooperation, making it attractive from a political standpoint. However, the marriage also brought Phoenician religious practices directly into Israel. When Jezebel arrived in the capital city of Samaria, she brought with her priests, servants, and a deep devotion to Baal. Rather than embracing the worship of the God of Israel, she began promoting her own religion throughout the kingdom. Temples dedicated to Baal were constructed, altars were erected, and pagan rituals became increasingly common. King Ahab supported many of these changes, allowing Jezebel's influence to spread rapidly. What seemed like a simple political marriage soon transformed into a spiritual crisis, setting the stage for one of the most dramatic conflicts recorded in biblical history. Jezebel's influence over Israel continued to grow after she established the worship of Baal throughout the kingdom. What began as the introduction of a foreign religion soon became an aggressive campaign against those who remained faithful to the God of Israel. Determined to strengthen Baal's position and eliminate opposition, Jezebel used her royal authority to silence the prophets who spoke in God's name. Many faithful men were hunted down and killed, while others were forced into hiding. Fear spread across the land as people realized that openly worshipping the Lord could place their lives in danger. Despite the growing persecution, some remained loyal. One of King Ahab's officials, Obadiah, secretly protected 100 prophets by hiding them in caves. He supplied them with food and water, while Jezebel's search for them intensified. The kingdom became divided between those who followed Baal and those who still trusted in the God of their ancestors. During this time, a prophet named Elijah emerged as Jezebel's greatest enemy. Unlike many others, he refused to remain silent. Elijah boldly appeared before King Ahab and delivered a shocking message. Because Israel had abandoned God and embraced idolatry, there would be neither rain nor dew in the land until God commanded it. Soon afterward, the skies closed and the drought began. Months turned into years. Fields dried up under the relentless sun. Rivers shrank and crops failed. Livestock died from thirst, and famine spread throughout the kingdom. The suffering affected both rich and poor alike. Yet despite the disaster, Jezebel did not abandon Baal worship. Instead, she blamed Elijah for the nation's troubles and intensified her efforts to capture him. Ahab searched throughout neighboring kingdoms for the prophet, but Elijah remained hidden under God's protection. As the drought worsened, tensions increased across Israel. The conflict was no longer simply about religion or politics. It had become a struggle between truth and deception, faith and idolatry. The stage was being set for a dramatic confrontation that would reveal where true power really existed. After more than 3 years of drought and famine, Elijah emerged from hiding with a challenge that would shake the entire kingdom. He instructed King Ahab to gather the people of Israel and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. News of the event spread quickly, and crowds traveled from across the land to witness what many believed would be a decisive moment. The nation had been divided between the worship of God and the worship of Baal, and now the conflict would be settled before everyone's eyes. Standing before the gathered people, Elijah asked a powerful question. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him. The crowd remained silent, unsure of what to say. Elijah then proposed a test. 2 bulls would be prepared as sacrifices, one for Baal and one for the Lord. The prophets would call upon their God, and Elijah would call upon the God of Israel. The God who answered with fire from heaven would be recognized as the true God. The people agreed. The prophets of Baal went first. From morning until noon they shouted, prayed, and danced around their altar. They begged Baal to answer, but nothing happened. As the hours passed, they cried louder and even injured themselves with knives according to their customs. Blood flowed, but the sky remained silent. There was no voice, no fire, and no response. Then Elijah stepped forward. He repaired a broken altar dedicated to the Lord and carefully arranged the sacrifice upon it. To make the miracle undeniable, he ordered servants to pour large amounts of water over the altar until everything was completely soaked. When he finished, Elijah prayed a simple prayer asking God to reveal his power. Instantly, fire fell from heaven. It consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water surrounding the altar. The astonished crowd fell to the ground and declared that the Lord was God. Yet while the people witnessed this incredible miracle, Jezebel's heart remained unchanged. When she learned what had happened, her anger burned hotter than ever, and she swore to take Elijah's life. Although the dramatic events on Mount Carmel had exposed the powerlessness of Baal, Jezebel's influence over King Ahab remained strong. Rather than turning away from corruption and idolatry, the royal couple continued to abuse their authority. One of the most infamous examples of their wickedness involved a man named Naboth and a piece of land that would eventually bring God's judgment upon them. Naboth owned a vineyard located near King Ahab's palace in Jezreel. The vineyard had belonged to his family for generations and represented an inheritance passed down through his ancestors. Ahab desired the land because it was conveniently located beside his property. He approached Naboth with an offer, proposing either to buy the vineyard or exchange it for a better piece of land elsewhere. However, Naboth respectfully refused. According to the laws of Israel, family inheritance was considered sacred, and he did not want to give away the land entrusted to his family. Ahab returned to the palace angry and depressed. He lay on his bed, refused to eat, and acted like a spoiled child who could not get what he wanted. When Jezebel saw his condition, she questioned him about the reason for his sadness. After hearing the story, she mocked his weakness and assured him that she would solve the problem herself. Using the king's authority, Jezebel devised a cruel scheme. She wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with the royal seal. The letters instructed local leaders to organize a public gathering and falsely accuse Naboth of cursing both God and the king. 2 dishonest men were recruited to serve as false witnesses. Their lies convinced the people that Naboth had committed a terrible crime. Following the accusations, Naboth was dragged outside the city and executed by stoning. With the vineyard owner dead, Ahab immediately took possession of the land he had desired. The crime appeared successful, but nothing remained hidden from God. The murder of an innocent man and the abuse of royal power had crossed a line that would soon bring severe consequences. As Ahab walked through his newly acquired vineyard, a prophet was already on his way with a message of divine judgment that neither king nor queen could escape. After Naboth's death, King Ahab believed he had finally obtained the vineyard he desired. The land now belonged to him, and it seemed that Jezebel's plan had succeeded without consequence. But while earthly courts had been deceived by false witnesses, God had seen everything. The murder of an innocent man, the theft of his inheritance, and the abuse of royal authority had not gone unnoticed. As Ahab entered the vineyard to claim his prize, he was unexpectedly confronted by the prophet Elijah. The sudden appearance of Elijah startled the king. Ahab immediately recognized him and bitterly asked, "Have you found me, my enemy?" Elijah replied that he had indeed found him because Ahab had sold himself to do evil in the sight of the Lord. The prophet then delivered one of the most terrifying judgments recorded in the Bible, because Ahab and Jezebel had led Israel into idolatry and committed terrible acts of injustice. Disaster would come upon their royal house. Their dynasty would be destroyed, and their descendants would be cut off from power. Elijah's message became even more personal when he spoke about Jezebel. The prophet declared that because of her wickedness, she would suffer a shameful death. He foretold that dogs would devour her body near the walls of Jezreel, leaving little behind. It was a shocking prophecy, one that revealed the seriousness of God's judgment against her actions. For the first time in many years, Ahab showed signs of remorse. He tore his clothes, wore sackcloth, and humbled himself before God. Seeing this temporary repentance, God delayed part of the punishment until after Ahab's lifetime. However, the judgment itself was not cancelled. The consequences would still come upon his family and kingdom. Years passed and life appeared to continue as normal. Jezebel remained powerful and influential, perhaps believing that Elijah's words would never come true. Yet prophecy in the Bible is never forgotten. Though the judgment seemed delayed, it was steadily moving toward fulfillment. The queen who had once terrorized prophets, manipulated kings, and murdered innocent people was approaching the final chapter of her story, a downfall as dramatic as her rise to power. The years passed, and the prophecy spoken by Elijah seemed distant, but it was never forgotten. King Ahab eventually died in battle, just as the prophet had foretold. Yet Jezebel remained alive, continuing to wield influence within the royal family. Even after her husband's death, she maintained her position as the powerful queen mother, confident that her status and authority could protect her from any threat. But the day of judgment was drawing near. God raised up a military commander named Jehu to bring an end to Ahab's corrupt dynasty. Jehu was anointed king and given the mission of carrying out divine judgment against the house of Ahab. One by one, Ahab's descendants and supporters fell before him. News of Jehu's advance spread quickly throughout the kingdom, eventually reaching Jezebel in the city of Jezreel. Rather than fleeing, Jezebel prepared herself to meet her fate. She carefully applied makeup to her eyes, arranged her hair, and looked out from a palace window as Jehu entered the city. Even in the face of danger, she attempted to project confidence and authority. As Jehu approached, she called down from the window, mocking him and questioning his loyalty. Jehu looked up and shouted, asking if anyone inside the palace was on his side. Several palace officials appeared at the window. Without hesitation, Jehu commanded them to throw her down. They obeyed immediately. Jezebel was hurled from the window, crashing to the ground below. Her blood splattered against the wall and on the horses nearby. Jehu then rode over the fallen queen, marking the end of her reign. Later, when servants went to bury her body, they made a horrifying discovery. Much of her remains had already been consumed by dogs, exactly as Elijah had prophesied years before. Only a few fragments were left behind. The prophecy had been fulfilled in remarkable detail. Thus ended the life of Jezebel, one of the most infamous figures in biblical history. She had possessed beauty, intelligence, wealth, and power, yet her legacy became a warning about pride, corruption, idolatry, and the misuse of authority. Her story remains one of the Bible's most dramatic examples of how power without righteousness can lead to destruction.